In this lesson, we'll learn how we can start to switch the rendering engine used in 3ds Max. Okay, so right out of the box, 3ds Max is going to come with two main rendering engines that we can use. The first engine that we have is the scanline render, and that's going to be used for pretty much your initial visualization, so it can do pretty much everything that you would need to as far as being able to calculate shadows, reflections, refractions, and things like that. Now, the other engine that we have available to us is called Mental Ray. Now, Mental Ray is going to be much better suited for highly realistic renders where we can start to get soft shadows, much more realistic lighting, and things like that. So, for the sake of some of our upcoming lessons where we're going to start taking a look at some of the specialized Mental Ray features, I'm going to go ahead and show you how we can actually start to change the rendering engine that gets used. So, there's a couple of different ways of actually changing this. One is to actually go into your render setup and make the adjustment that way. So up in my top menu bar, I'm going to go into the render setup. Alright, and inside the common tab, first of all, if you take a look up here, you can actually see which render engine is being used. So in my case, we are going to be rendering with the default scanline render. So again, to change this, we're going to go into the common tab. Let's scroll down. And all the way down at the bottom, we have Assign Renderer. So let's expand that rollout. And right now we do have this, again, set to the default scanline render. If we click on this button over here to choose, we can now switch over to the Mental Ray renderer. So press OK, give it just a moment, and really it doesn't look like much has changed, but you will notice that now Mental Ray is listed as our renderer. And now if you take a look inside this render setup title bar, we do have Mental Ray listed as the default renderer now. Alright, so now if I were to come in and render out my current frame, you'll notice that when my rendered frame window opens up, that now we do have some additional controls that are listed down here. Now these controls you'll only see once Mental Ray is chosen as your rendering engine. If we were to actually use the scanline render, we actually would not have these list of controls down here, so this is a pretty good visual indicator of whether or not you're actually using Mental Ray or the scanline render. Again, if we wanted to just show that for comparison, if we were to open up the render setting and go back, again making sure we're in the common tab, assign render, switch that back to the default scanline, and now you'll notice that in this rendered window that there are no longer any controls that we had before. Now if we wanted to, we didn't necessarily have to go into the render setup in order to change this. What we could also do is use this render preset pull down that can be found inside our rendered frame window. So we have things like the Mental Ray No GI, and we also do have a few default scanline render settings as well. Alright, but usually though, as a matter of personal preference, whenever I'm starting to switch into the Mental Ray renderer, typically whenever using some of these presets, these will start to come in and start to enable different render settings and different render options that you may or may not need. So really, just to make sure that I don't wind up with a whole bunch of options turned on that I may not need, instead, just going into the render setup, choosing the Mental Ray renderer as my render, and that way now I pretty much have all of these default settings with really no additional options turned on that I may or may not need. Alright, so for now, if I were to just simply re-render this, we probably won't see too much of a change compared to what we had before. Alright, so looking at this, again, not really just a tremendous amount of difference here. But the reason I want to show you how to turn this on is because in our next lesson we're going to start taking a look at some of the specialized shadow attributes found in some of our different lights. And some of these different attributes and parameters that we're going to be looking at will only function inside of Mental Ray. So in preparation for our next lesson, again, make sure that you are actually using Mental Ray as your rendering engine. Alright, so now that we have this set up, in our next lesson we'll start to take a look at some of these special light parameters and how we can start to control the different shadows of our lights.